Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about Leadership in Turbulent Times by Dorris, Kearns, Goodwin. In this book, Dorris, Kearns, Goodwin talks about Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon B. Johnson. Today I'm going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln. Throughout his life, Lincoln was judged a lot based on his appearance because he was tall, gawky, lanky. In fact, when he moved to the small village of New Salem, they all thought he was unattractive and judged him based on his looks. However, they soon learned that he was a great man. He moved to the small village of New Salem 8 months before the state legislature elections. He was able to win the people of New Salem over and get their votes. But how did he do this? The key aspect of him was his sociability. He was a good person, and he was always down to lend a hand to someone who needed it, or just spend a good time with someone, talking and laughing and sharing stories. Sharing stories was his specialty. He was very good at it, and he was able to connect with a lot of people and socialize through his storytelling. Eventually, Lincoln decided he needed to learn grammar, as he didn't learn grammar properly when he was a child. So he went to New Salem's schoolmaster and asked him if they had any grammar books. Unfortunately, they didn't. But the schoolmaster knew of a copy 6 miles away from New Salem. So Lincoln trekked the 6 miles, got the book, and studied it every day. According to Goodwin, he worked hard to develop a simple, compact style of speaking and writing with short, clear sentences that would be understood by all classes. Seeing everything that Lincoln did, the people of New Salem grew very fond of Lincoln. In fact, the store clerk of the store that Lincoln worked at made sure his fire was burning bright every night so that Lincoln could come and read his books and study. The election soon came, and Lincoln became known for his candid way in which he approached every question and by his habit of illustrating his arguments with stories based on observations drawn from all classes of society, says Goodwin. In fact, one of his goals he advertised in his campaign was increase governmental support for internal improvements, which included infrastructure. He learned from the Sangamon River of New Salem that it could be so much more helpful if the infrastructure was more developed, and that New Salem and other small villages in similar conditions could thrive. In fact, by piloting a flatboat on the river, he gained first-hand knowledge. Another key aspect of Lincoln was that he had great timing. Great timing of knowing when to wait and when to act. This finely developed sense of timing would remain in Lincoln's repertoire of leadership skills for the rest of his life. After he was elected into the state legislature, it was clear that Lincoln was a very important part of his party. Due to his thorough knowledge of human nature, from observing and noting in his daily life, he prepared his fellow Whig party very well for debates. Another key aspect of Lincoln, he could grasp and concentrate the matters under discussion, and his clear statement of an intricate or obscure subject was better than an ordinary argument. When it came to the subject of slavery, Lincoln believed it was essential to abide by a law until that settled law be successfully changed. Every leader that Dorris Kearns Goodwin mentions in her book goes through a period of significant depression in their life. Lincoln had a period of depression too. It was due to a lot of things. But mainly, and the most important one, was that his infrastructure project was deteriorating. As Goodwin mentions, as one of the chief architects and advocates for the state's expansive dreams, Lincoln received the lion's share of the blame for the ensuing catastrophe. The crushing debt crippled the state, destroying its credit rating for years, and deterred new pioneers from settling in Illinois. Land values plummeted. Thousands lost their homes. Banks and brokerage houses closed down. Because he believed so much in his project, his belief in himself was shaken, and he announced his retirement from state legislature at the end of the current term. Lincoln's speeches were replete with good sense, sound reasoning, and irresistible argument, and spoken with the perfect command of manner and matter which so eminently distinguishes the Western orators. Lincoln had a peculiar schedule. He would wake up bright and early and sit in front of the fireplace and soliloquize. In the daytime, Lincoln defended his clients and developed the largest trial practice of all of his peers in central Illinois. The key part of Lincoln's success in law was his uncanny ability to break down the most complex case or issue into its simplest elements. As we discussed before, his language was composed of plain Anglo-Saxon words and almost always absolutely without adornment, and it was easy to follow. Lincoln himself said, "The art of communication is the lawyer's avenue to the public." Yet Lincoln warned the lawyer must not rely on rhetorical glibness or persuasiveness alone. What is well spoken must be yoked to what is well thought. Further on Lincoln's use of language, the way Lincoln had learned to use language, the collective story he told, and the depth of his conviction marked a turning point in his reputation as both a man and a leader. We clearly see Lincoln's ambition. When Lincoln was on his campaign to become president, he was offered to deliver a speech at Cooper Union in New York. While Lincoln was campaigning to become president, he was invited to deliver a speech at Cooper Union in New York. In preparation for this speech, Lincoln spent many weeks extensively researching the attitudes towards slavery of each of the 39 original signers of the Constitution, allowing him to demonstrate that a close reading of their writings and statements revealed that a clear majority had marked slavery as an evil not to be extended but to be tolerated and protected only because and so far as its actual presence among us makes that toleration and protection. This preparation shows Lincoln's care and ambition. He did not just do things on a whim and In fact, Goodwin herself says this in her book. The story of his life and his laborious efforts to educate himself made Lincoln into a man of the people, the American dream made flesh. In the third part of her book, Goodwin now lists the factors of something called transformational leadership. Goodwin discusses Lincoln in terms of his presidency and his transformational leadership during his presidency years. When Lincoln came into presidency, the House wasn't just divided. It was on fire. A very interesting aspect of Lincoln's presidency is that he had the most unusual cabinet, and apparently, according to Goodwin, in American history. His cabinet represented the New Republican Party, former Whigs, Free Soilers, and an anti-slavery Democrats, a combination of conservatives, moderates, and radicals of hardliners and conciliators. Lincoln created a team of independent, strong-minded men, all of whom were more experienced in public life, better educated, and more celebrated than he. In the top 3 positions at the State Department, the Treasury, and the Justice Department, he placed his 3 chief rivals: William Seward, Salmon Chase, and Edward Bates. Lincoln's reason for this was simple. The country was in peril, and Lincoln needed the most strongest and most able-minded men to assist him in these serious times. Number 1. Acknowledge when failed policies demand a change in direction. For this, Goodwin mentions a quote from Lincoln himself. "Things had gone from bad to worse," Lincoln recalled of that midsummer, "until I felt that we had reached the end of our rope on the plan of operations we had been pursuing, that we had played our last card and must change our tactics." Number 2. Gather first-hand information and ask questions. Lincoln made sure he was accessible to soldiers and easy to talk to. Through talking to these soldiers, Lincoln realized that the fortifying link between slavery and the Confederate war effort. Slaves did so much work for the Confederate. They dug the trenches, milled the farms, picked cotton, and so much more. And this is when he realized that if the rebels were divested of their slaves, the beleaguered North would thus gain a desperately needed military advantage. Number 3, find a time and space in which to think. Lincoln's chosen space was the soldier's home. In fact, in this setting, he was able to resolve the chasm between the constitutional protection of the slaves and the moral abomination of slavery. Number 4, assume full responsibility for a pivotal decision. Lincoln pledged all future executive governments to recognize and to maintain the freedom of slaves. This way, the government itself, rather than this particular administration, would be the guarantor of the full pledge. Lincoln hesitated to make a promise he himself could not fulfill, but in the end he embraced the importance of Seward's suggested alteration. Number 5. Understand the emotional needs of each member of the team. Everyone likes a compliment, Lincoln observed. Everyone needs praise for the work they're doing. Frequently, he penned handwritten notes to his colleagues, extending his gratitude for their actions. Number 6. Refuse to let past resentments fester. Transcend personal vendettas. When Stanton and Lincoln first met, Stanton did not recognize Lincoln. In fact, when Lincoln handed him a brief, he never opened it, never touched it, and never consulted him. Out of this humiliation, however, came a powerful self-scrutiny on Lincoln's part, a savage desire to improve himself. Personally, I think this was very important, and I took this line really to heart because it made me realize that no matter how bad humiliation is, the best you can get out of it is to improve yourself through it. And by bringing Stanton into his cabinet, Lincoln suppressed his personal resentment as not as many men would have done. Number 7. Set a standard of mutual respect and dignity. Control anger. One situation out of many is when Blair, a member of his cabinet, had written a letter in the earlier days of the war, talking bad about Lincoln and just expressing his anger. The embarrassed Blair carried the letter to Lincoln, however Lincoln said forget it, and never mention or think of it again. An interesting thing about Lincoln is that he loved theater. In fact, during his 4 years as president, he visited the theater over 100 times. It was his way of finding a balance and escape from reality. Number 8. Keep your word. Lincoln himself said, "My word is out, and I can't take it back." Frederick Douglass even described Lincoln as, "Lincoln is not the man to reconsider, retract, and contradict words and purposes solemnly proclaimed over his official signature." These last 2 factors are what really made him successful as a president. Number 1. Be accessible and easy to approach. And number 2. Put ambition for the collective interest above self-interest. Both these factors affected the soldiers and army of America. In fact, many soldiers called him Father Abraham, Uncle Abe, Old Abe. The biblical references and the filial relations connotated a reciprocal emotional charge and a shared vulnerability. Many soldiers carried Abraham Lincoln in their hearts while fighting for the common cause. Goodwin states, "In casting their ballots for Lincoln, the soldiers knew in all likelihood they were prolonging their personal risk and their duration of their wartime service. They were voting against their self-interest for the greater collective interest that Lincoln had powerfully expressed in his talks with them. This contest is not merely for today, but for all time to come," Lincoln had reiterated in numerous ways. And when they went to the polls, the soldiers voted not for their own safety, but for the man who had come to represent the cause they fought for together. This shows the amazing image that Lincoln had and the trust the people had in him. It also shows that his efforts did not go unnoticed and were appreciated by the people. When the 13th Amendment was passed, Lincoln said, "I have only been an instrument," he insisted. "The anti-slavery people of the country and the army have done it all." In the great convergence of the man and his times, Lincoln had driven, guided, and inspired his cabinet, the army, and his countrymen. He had led a whole nation fighting for what is right. Through the story of Abraham Lincoln, Goodwin highlights the importance of language, as shown in the language of Lincoln's leadership, and the moral purpose and meaning that was imprinted upon the Civil War. Goodwin highlights the incredible connection and communication Abraham Lincoln had with all people, from his cabinet members to the people of the Union, and most importantly, U.S. soldiers. Goodwin goes specifically into how Abraham Lincoln established these connections and had such great communication. I think the key part that Goodwin wants us to learn from Lincoln is how he observed people's experiences and learned from them, and not just listened to them, but also let it affect his decisions.